The heat in Mayor Thompson's office was a solid thing, thick with the smell of dry paper and old leather. Finn stood with his back to the door, a mountain of a man who made the small room feel like a crate. His buckskins were worn soft at the shoulders and knees, and his long, sun-bleached hair was tied back with a leather thong. He had been promised a farmhand, a strong boy to help him bring in the hay before the summer storms turned the high meadows to mud. He needed the help. With 8-year-old twins to raise and a homestead carved out of unforgiving rock, one pair of hands was never enough. He looked at the person the mayor had presented, and the silence stretched thin. She was small, dressed in a plain, light blue prairie dress that seemed too large for her thin frame. Her black hair was pulled into a neat, severe knot at the nape of her neck, and her hands were clasped before her, still and waiting. She was not a boy. She was not a farmhand. She was a Chinese girl, barely 19, with eyes that held the stillness of a deep forest pool. "Mayor?" Finn's voice was a low rumble, like stones shifting underground. "This is some kind of joke." Mayor Thompson, a man whose face was a road map of compromises, sighed and wiped his brow. "No joke, Finn. Her name is An Lin. She's all I could get. The railroad contract fell through. This is what they left behind." He did not say she was sold or bartered, but the word hung in the air between them. An Lin did not look at either man. Her gaze was fixed on a crack in the floorboards, her posture one of absolute control. Finn saw the calluses on her fingers, the faint scar that traced her jawline. This was not the soft creature she appeared to be. Still, a girl this slight would be broken by the work on his mountain. He turned to leave. "I can't take her." "You have to," the mayor said, his voice dropping. "There are men looking for her. She isn't safe here in town. Up there with you, she's just another shadow on the mountain. Please, Finn, it's the only way." Finn stopped, his hand on the door latch. He felt the weight of the mayor's plea, the desperation behind it. He looked back at An Lin, at the rigid line of her spine. She was not a shadow. She was a target, and the mayor was making her his. The ride up the mountain was a study in silence. An Lin sat perched on the wagon seat beside him, her small bundle of possessions at her feet. She did not flinch at the lurching of the wheels over rock, nor did she speak. She simply watched the pines grow thicker, the air grow thinner. Finn felt her presence like a hum beneath the noise of the crickets and the wind. He was a man accustomed to solitude, a quiet broken only by the laughter and squabbles of his daughters, Clara and Willa. This new silence was different. It was watchful. When they finally broke through the tree line into the high meadow where his cabin stood, the last of the sun's orange light was catching on the hand-hewn logs. The house was solid, built to withstand winter gales, with a stone chimney breathing a thin plume of smoke. Two identical figures with braided hair burst from the door, their faces a mixture of excitement and suspicion. "Papa!" they yelled in unison. They stopped short when they saw An Lin, their twin expressions clouding over. Finn swung down from the wagon, his large frame moving with a practiced ease. "Girls, this is An Lin. She'll be staying with us for a while." Clara, the bolder of the two, narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Willa hid behind her sister, peering out. An Lin slid from the wagon seat before Finn could offer a hand. She landed as softly as a cat, her eyes taking in the cabin, the half-finished fence, the waiting woodpile. She looked at the girls, her expression unreadable, and gave a short, formal bow. The twins stared, speechless. Finn cleared his throat. "Unload the supplies. An Lin, you can take the cot by the hearth." He expected protest, or at least hesitation. Instead, she picked up her bundle and walked past him into the cabin without a word. He watched her go, a strange disquiet settling in his gut. She moved as if she already knew the layout of the place, her steps measured and sure. He had brought a stranger into his home, a woman with a past that had men hunting her, and he didn't even know if she could cook. That night he found her stitching one of Willa's torn dresses by firelight, her needle moving with a swift, economical grace that was mesmerizing. The first week passed in a rhythm of uneasy cooperation. An Lin rose before the sun, her quiet movements a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of the twins. She did not need to be told what to do. She fed the chickens, weeded the stubborn garden patch, and mended clothes with a skill that shamed Finn's own clumsy efforts. She was an island of fierce, silent competence. The girls watched her with a mixture of awe and resentment. She never tried to mother them, never offered easy smiles or placating words. When Clara fell and scraped her knee, An Lin simply cleaned the wound with boiled water and a clean rag, her touch firm and impersonal. Yet, Finn noticed, the bandage was perfectly tied. He found himself watching her too. He'd watch her hands as she kneaded dough for bread, strong and sure. He'd see the way she scanned the tree line when she went to the well, a constant, subtle vigilance that pricked at his own sense of security. They rarely spoke. Their exchanges were clipped and practical. "The wood is low. I'll split more after midday. The west fence needs mending. I saw." One afternoon, 3 riders crested the ridge, their horses dark against the bright summer sky. They were not prospectors or trappers. They wore dark coats despite the heat, and the guns on their hips were worn like tools of a trade. Finn's hand went to the axe propped against the woodpile. He motioned for the girls to get inside. An Lin was already gone, vanished into the shadows of the cabin. The lead rider, a man with a scarred face and cold, flat eyes, reined in his horse a few feet away. "We're looking for property of the Black Creek Company," the man said, his voice oily. "Lost a package on the rail line. Heard it might have ended up in these parts." Finn kept his grip loose on the axe handle. "Haven't seen any packages, just rock and pine up here." The man's eyes swept over the homestead, lingering on the cabin door. "It's not a thing, it's a person. A little Chinese girl. You seen one of those?" "Town's down the mountain," Finn said, his voice flat. The man smiled, a humorless twitch of his lips. "We'll be back. Company always collects what's owed." They wheeled their horses and trotted away, leaving a trail of dust and menace. When Finn went back inside, he found An Lin standing by the hearth, her back to him, holding a long iron poker. It was the first time he had seen her hands tremble. That night the mountain felt different. The familiar sounds of the wilderness were edged with threat. Finn sat on the porch, his rifle across his lap, watching the moon rise over the jagged peaks. He had lied for her. He had placed himself and his daughters between her and the men from the Black Creek Company. He wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the quiet way she had calmed the girls after the riders left, handing them each a warm biscuit without a word, a small gesture of comfort in the face of fear. Maybe it was the sight of her hands, steady once more as she sharpened the kitchen knives on a whetstone, her movements precise and deadly. He went inside long after the girls were asleep. An Lin was not on her cot. He found her by the cabin's single rear window, a small opening that looked out into the dense forest. She stood perfectly still, a silhouette against the pale moonlight. "They will come back," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of certainty. "I know," he answered, stopping a few feet behind her. "You should have told me." She turned then, and for the first time he saw the mask of calm control slip. In her eyes was a deep, profound exhaustion, the look of someone who had been running for a very long time. "To tell you was to make you a part of it. The mayor, he gave me no choice." "He gave me no choice either," Finn countered, his voice rougher than he intended. A tense silence fell between them. The air was thick with unspoken things, her secrets, his resentment, their shared danger. The attack came without warning. A whistle cut through the night, sharp and sudden, followed by the shattering of the front window. Glass sprayed across the floorboards. Finn reacted instantly, shoving An Lin away from the rear window and pulling his rifle up. "Get the girls! Under the bed!" he roared. But An Lin was already moving, not towards a children's room, but towards the hearth. She grabbed the heavy iron poker, its tip still glowing faintly from the embers. Another shot splintered the door frame. A man's shadow fell across the broken window, trying to climb through. Before Finn could aim, An Lin lunged. She didn't scream or hesitate. She moved with a fluid, brutal economy, driving the poker into the man's shoulder. He howled in pain and fell back outside. The motion was not that of a frightened girl. It was the practiced strike of a fighter. The night exploded into a maelstrom of noise and violence. Muffled shouts from outside, the crack of rifles, the splintering of wood. Finn fired through the broken window, the recoil a familiar punch against his shoulder. He saw two figures melt back into the trees. They weren't trying to storm the house anymore. They were trying to pin him down. "They're trying to flank us," he said, his voice tight as he reloaded. An Lin was no longer by the hearth. She was pressed against the wall beside the door, a long butcher knife in her hand, her breathing steady and even. She was watching the weak points, the door, the remaining window, her entire being focused into a point of lethal readiness. It was in that moment of chaos that Finn understood. She wasn't just a target. She was a threat. She was dangerous in her own right. The man she had disabled was groaning outside. One of his companions yelled his name. Then another voice, colder and more authoritative, cut through the darkness. "She's in there! The one with the ledgers! Burn them out!" Ledgers. The word hit Finn like a physical blow. This wasn't about a runaway servant or a stolen trinket. This was organized. Corporate. An Lin flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. Her secret was out, shouted into the night for him to hear. She risked a glance at him, her eyes wide in the flickering lamplight. It was a look of profound guilt, of apology for the hell she had brought to his doorstep. "I am sorry," she whispered, the words almost lost in the sudden volley of gunfire that peppered the cabin's front wall. "Later," Finn grunted, his focus locked on the shadows moving outside. "We need to keep them from the back." He didn't have time for the betrayal he felt coiling in his stomach. He had time only for survival. He pointed with his rifle barrel. "That window. Can you watch it?" She nodded, her grip on the knife tightening. They were no longer a man and his unwanted charge. They were two defenders in a fortress under siege, the hidden truth of her past now a shared and deadly present. He saw the flicker of a torch near the barn. Damn it. The siege settled into a grim rhythm. Gunshots punctuated long stretches of tense silence. Finn and An Lin moved through the small cabin like two parts of a single machine, their actions dictated by necessity. He would fire a shot to draw their attention while she shifted to a new position. She would watch the dark corners of the woods, her keen eyes picking out movement he might have missed. They communicated in gestures and single words. Left. Low. 3 of them. The twins were huddled under their bed, whimpering softly. The sound was a knife in Finn's heart, fueling a cold, protective rage. He was a man who had built his life on peace, on the quiet solitude of the mountain, and these men had brought the war of their greedy world to his home. He risked a look out the shattered window. The torch he'd seen earlier was now a growing blaze. They had set fire to his barn. The smell of burning hay and pine filled the air, acrid and sickening. His milk cow, the pack mule, they were in there. A wave of fury washed over him, so powerful it almost sent him charging out the door. A small, firm hand on his arm stopped him. An Lin. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "They want you outside." She was right. It was a trap. He fought down the rage, forcing himself to think tactically. The house was their only defensible position, but the fire was a weapon too, a psychological blow meant to break them. A bullet ripped through the wall near his head, showering them with splinters. He shoved her down, covering her body with his own for a split second before rolling away. "They're getting closer," he breathed, crawling toward the other side of the room. The fire from the barn cast long, dancing shadows, making it harder to see the attackers. He needed to get to a better vantage point, the small loft window that overlooked the side of the property. "Cover me." He didn't wait for a reply. He trusted she would. He scrambled up the ladder to the sleeping loft, the rifle awkward in the tight space. From here he could see them, 4 men, using the smoke from the barn as cover, advancing on the house. He raised the rifle, took aim at the lead figure, and squeezed the trigger. The man cried out and dropped, clutching his leg. The others scattered, diving for cover behind the woodpile and the large boulders that dotted the yard. It bought them a few moments. As he reloaded, he felt a sharp, searing pain in his left arm. He looked down, surprised to see the dark stain of blood spreading across his sleeve. A stray shot, or maybe a piece of shrapnel from the wall, had torn through the muscle. It wasn't deep, but it burned like hellfire. He gritted his teeth and finished reloading. Below, he heard a small gasp. An Lin had seen him get hit. He glanced down and saw her face, pale in the combined light of the moon and the fire. The warrior's mask was gone, replaced by a look of raw, unguarded fear, not for herself, but for him. The sight struck him with more force than the bullet had. He started to climb back down the ladder, his arms screaming in protest. "It's nothing," he grunted. But she was already moving toward him, ripping a long strip of cloth from the hem of her light blue dress. The simple domestic act was so at odds with the violence surrounding them that it felt surreal. She reached him as his feet touched the floor, her small hands immediately going to his arm, her touch surprisingly gentle as she began to wrap the makeshift bandage. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice barely a whisper. In that moment, surrounded by the threat of fire and bullets, with the smell of gunpowder in the air, the world narrowed to the space between them. Her focused expression, her deft fingers tying the knot, the warmth of her breath against his skin. It was the most vulnerable he had felt all night, and the safest. The emotional wall he had kept between them crumbled to dust. He was no longer just protecting a stranger. He was protecting An Lin. The attack receded with the first hint of dawn, the gray light revealing the devastation. The barn was a smoldering skeleton against the sky. The cabin walls were pocked with bullet holes, the door hanging off a single hinge. But they were alive. The Black Creek men had retreated, taking their wounded with them, leaving only trampled earth and the lingering smell of smoke. Exhaustion hit Finn like a physical weight, so heavy he could barely stand. His arm throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. He sank onto a stool, the rifle clattering to the floor beside him. The girls, finally coaxed from under the bed, were clinging to each other on their cot, their faces tear-streaked and pale. An Lin moved through the wreckage with a quiet purpose. She retrieved the water bucket, which miraculously had not been hit, and brought him a dipper full of cool, clean water. He drank it down, his eyes never leaving her. She then went to the girls, speaking to them in a low, soothing tone he couldn't quite hear. He watched as Willa, who had barely looked at An Lin for a week, allowed the woman to smooth back her hair. An Lin returned to him with a clean rag and a small tin of salve. She untied the blood-soaked strip of her dress and began to clean his wound properly. Her touch was methodical, efficient, but it was no longer impersonal. There was a current of care in her movements that went beyond mere necessity. "The ledgers," he said, his voice raspy. "What's in 'em?" She didn't stop her work, her eyes focused on his arm. "Everything," she said softly. "Names, shipments, payments to lawmen, to judges. Proof that the Black Creek Company built their fortune on stolen land and broken lives. My father was their bookkeeper. When he tried to expose them, they killed him. I was the only one who knew where he hid the second copy." He watched her face, seeing the grief she held so tightly beneath the surface. He finally understood the depth of her courage, the weight of the burden she carried. She wasn't just running for her life. She was trying to carry her father's legacy to a place where it might matter. She finished tying the new bandage. Her hands lingered on his arm for a moment longer than necessary. "They will be back," he stated, "with more men." "I know," she replied, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were dark with a sorrow that he now shared. "I should leave. Take this fight away from you and your children." "No," he said, the word coming out with a force that surprised them both. "They started this fight. We're going to finish it. Here." They spent the day turning the cabin into a true fortress. The sun beat down on the ravaged homestead, illuminating the cost of their survival. Finn, his arms stiff and aching, worked with a grim determination. He and An Lin dragged the heavy oak table to barricade the broken door. They boarded up the shattered window, leaving only small slits to see and shoot through. Their movements were synchronized, their purpose singular. The silence between them had transformed again. It was no longer the silence of suspicion or of shared trauma, but of deep, unspoken understanding. He would hand her a hammer, and her hand would brush his. She would pass him a strip of leather to bind a loose board, and their eyes would meet for a fraction of a second. In those fleeting moments, a new language was being formed, one built of shared risk and mutual respect. The girls, subdued and quiet, helped in their own small ways, gathering nails and holding boards steady. They no longer looked at An Lin as an intruder. They looked at her as a protector, a vital part of their small, besieged family. Late in the afternoon, Finn found her standing by the edge of the woods, looking down the mountain pass. Her shoulders were slumped, the first sign of weariness he had seen in her. "They think you are weak because you are a woman," he said, coming to stand beside her. "They think I am simple because I live on a mountain." She turned her head slightly, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "They are wrong about both of us." "Yes," he agreed. He hesitated, searching for the right words, but practicalities came more easily. "We need to conserve water. And ammunition." "I counted the cartridges," she said. "We have enough, if we make every shot count." Her pragmatism was a comfort. It grounded him, kept the fear at bay. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, he saw her gaze drift to the twins, who were sitting on the porch steps, sharing a piece of dried apple. A look of profound longing crossed her face. "I did not mean to bring this to them," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He reached out, not thinking, and laid his large, calloused hand over hers where it rested on the fence rail. Her skin was cool. She did not pull away. "You're not a stranger," he said, the words feeling inadequate but true. "Not anymore." The final assault began just after midnight. This time there was no subtlety. A wave of men, at least 6 of them, charged from the tree line, firing as they came. They carried torches, not just to see, but to burn. The leader, the scarred man from the first visit, directed them with guttural shouts. "The house! Burn the house!" Finn and An Lin were ready. They stood back to back in the center of the dark cabin, each covering a different angle. The world became a blur of muzzle flashes, the deafening roar of gunfire, and the thud of bullets hitting the log walls. A torch arced through the air, landing on the roof. The dry shingles caught immediately. "The roof is on fire!" Clara screamed from the corner where she and Willow were huddled. Smoke began to snake down from the ceiling. Panic, sharp and cold, tried to grip Finn, but he shoved it away. An Lin was a rock of calm beside him. She fired through a slit in the boards, and a man outside screamed and fell. Her movements were economical, wasting nothing. "The well," she said, her voice tight and strained over the noise. "If we can get to the well, we can fight the fire." It was a desperate, suicidal idea. The well was in the middle of the yard, completely exposed. But she was right. If the house burned, they would be forced out into the open, or they would be slaughtered. "I'll draw their fire to the front," he yelled. "You go out the back. Be fast." "No, we go together." Before he could argue, she grabbed his good arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Together. They burst out the back door into a world of smoke and chaos. The heat from the burning roof was intense. They ran, low to the ground, for the dark shape of the well. A bullet whizzed past Finn's ear. He fired back blindly toward the flash. They reached the stone well and dropped behind it, a shower of dirt kicking up where they had just been. The gunfire was concentrated on them now. Above the din, Finn heard another sound, the distant but distinct thunder of many horses riding hard up the mountain pass. The mayor. He had finally sent help. The scarred man must have heard it too. He roared in frustration. "Forget the man! Get the girl and the ledgers! Now!" Hope and terror warred in Finn's chest. Help was coming, but it might be too late. The attackers abandoned all caution, charging their position. He and An Lin rose from behind the well, firing their last few shots. It was then, in the smoky, fiery light, that he saw her standing beside him, her face grim, her small frame unyielding. She was magnificent, and he knew, with a certainty that cut through all the chaos, that he would not let them take her.